Thanks to all of you for coming out to be with us on a Saturday morning.
Grazie a tutti voi che siete venuti qui di sabato mattina.
Do we have enough chairs for our people on the back?
Spero che ci siano abbastanza sedie per tutti quanti.
Ci
sono delle sedie qui davanti, eh?
We have some here, up here.
Prima fila.
I have been coming here now. I have been coming here now for maybe 6 years.
Sono forse 6 anni che vengo qui,
So I feel like I am part of the family here.
quindi
Very
mi
nice.
sento parte della famiglia.
It's nice to be with you again.
Mi fa piacere essere tornato.
And today we embark on a new frontier.
E quest'oggi partiamo per una nuova frontiera.
I will provide very few answers, but many questions.
Vi darò pochissime risposte, ma farò molte domande.
Now I begin reading.
A questo punto leggiamo, quindi voi ci avete sullo schermo la traduzione.
Over a decade ago, the playwright Sam Shepard made the following observation. The struggle with the land is finished. Now the frontier is the computer, so it has become an internal thing. Computers cause protracted dreaming about what might be, and the frontier everyone is seeking is now in the imagination. Today, a retrospective assessment of Shepard's comment was that it was prophetic. Perhaps it did not go far enough. The cyberspace is an internal thing is only partly true, but it also has a lot in common with transitional space in Winnicott's sense. In other words, it is not truly an internal realm, but it lies somewhere between external reality and our internal world. When we sit at the computer, we are both real and not real. There is a fundamental paradox in cyber communication. It presents a radical challenge to our traditional notions of privacy, but also offers us a place to hide. It allows for the possibility of a playful expansion of the self. The screen persona is both me and not me. As Sherry Turkle, a leading scholar of the Internet at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology,
Sherry Turkle è una delle principali esperti di Internet e lavora all'MIT.
says, you can have a sense of self without being oneself. Moreover, to an alarming extent, the assortment of electronic instruments that hold us hostage, Twitter, social networking, blogging, email, texting, etc., may conspire to turn us away from the internal realm and demand that we attend to the external signals that surround us and command our attention. As Bill Keller, writing about Twitter in the New York Times Magazine, recently noted, Twitter is the enemy of contemplation.
Ah, scusate, ho tradotto proprio il contrario. Twitter è il nemico della contemplazione. Proprio, scusate, ho proprio sbagliato.
Jaron Lanier is the author of a book, You Are Not a Gadget, and a leading critic of the social change brought about by technology. He addressed this problem boldly at the South by Southwest Interactive Conference in Austin, Texas, 2 years ago. Before he gave his talk, he asked everyone in the audience to turn off their handheld devices so they could not blog, text, or tweet while he was speaking. He later wrote about this radical maneuver, and he said, if you listen first and write later, then whatever you write will have had time to filter through your brain, and you will be in what you say. This is what makes you exist. If you are only a reflector of information, are you really there? Surely any forces that are the antithesis of introspection and self-reflection will have far-reaching consequences for the practice of psychoanalysis. Those consequences are formidable to contemplate and impossible to foresee in toto. Hence, in this communication today, I will confine myself to only 3 of the areas affected by this brave new world of cyberspace. 1, the self. 2, the domain of privacy. And 3, the intrusion of electronic communication into the analyst-patient relationship. I will also comment on the generational shift that is embedded in this revolution. To keep my presentation reasonably brief, I will not address Skype or phone therapy in this communication. So now we start with the self. Life in cyberspace provides us with the opportunity to hide out from others and become someone other than who we are. An adolescent girl can pretend to be a boy. One can shape a Facebook image to appeal to others rather than present oneself as one actually is, complete with flaws and shortcomings. A disenchanted adult can create an avatar and live an alternative existence in Second Life to compensate for disappointments in one's first and only life. In my 2001 paper in the Psychoanalytic Quarterly, Cyber Passion, Erotic Transference on the Internet, I wrote of a patient who engaged in a parallel analysis through email at the same time she was seeing me 4 times a week in my office. Her erotic transference was communicated almost entirely through email, since she could not abide the thought of communicating verbally to me about her sexual feelings. In effect, I dealt with a form of splitting that had previously been outside my experience. A proper and inhibited patient reclined on the couch in my office, but a passionately sexual version of the patient existed only in the realm of the internet, sending me emails. The fluidity or multiplicity of the self, a notion popular today among psychoanalytic thinkers, has received extensive confirmation from the protean forms of existence found in internet life. To a large extent, the self is shaped by interaction with others. Indeed, as Fonagy says, the baby finds a self by looking in the eyes of the mother. Sherry Turkle, in her new book, Alone Together, has eloquently articulated that we are now tethered to our devices and may be losing the art of human interaction. We are now facing an era of connectivity and its discontents. We are now witnessing an emergence of a radical new self, an online self that is more real than the old-fashioned self ensconced in human relatedness. We are surrounded by colleagues, friends, and families who are there but not there, and when they talk to you, they keep an eye on their phone, one eye on their phone, and one eye on you, so they talk like this. Even our patients now keep their cell phone on and visible during a session in case a message arrives that is far more important than the analytic discourse for which they are paying. Today, one watches oneself from a distance as a Facebook creation parading by the screen, a virtual version of the self freed from the vicissitudes of the body. It is also a self that is shaped by what one imagines that others wish to see online and by subtle forms of manipulation by Google, Facebook, and other major players. Search engines are now constructing algorithms on all of us so that they deliver search results that are catered to our internet histories, and they affirm what our likes and dislikes are without our knowing that they are doing that. The result is that we receive pleasant information that confirms our beliefs when we search. By personalizing searches, Google may be undermining the original conceptualization of the internet as a forum for the spread of new ideas, many unfamiliar to us, that would allow us to expand what we know and what we believe. We may soon live in a bubble where we hear the echo of our own voice when we search the internet. Hence, the diminution of reflection may be accompanied by a decline in expanded visions of ourselves and others. The advent of Facebook and Twitter was heralded with the potential for self-expression, a chorus of idiosyncratic voices that would lead to a greater sense of individuality. The paradox is that exactly the opposite is occurring. Lanier, the critic, calls this the hive mind, like a beehive. Yeah, beehive. The hive mind, a collective consciousness through electronic communication that eliminates the individual voice in favor of the collective voice. In the midst of the hundreds of texts, Facebook postings, and emails that young people are fielding today, they have little time to turn inward and contemplate some form of authentic self. Winnicott felt that at the core of the true self in all of us is a segment that must remain incommunicado. This isolation preserves an authenticity that is sacred to the evolving self. And you all know, so you have to, I'm departing from the text.
Okay.
You all know a 16-year-old adolescent puts a sign on his door saying, "No parents allowed."
Tutti conoscete un ragazzino di 16 anni che mette un cartello sulla porta, vietato l'ingresso ai genitori.
And he stays in his room alone and thinks.
E sta da solo nella sua stanza e pensa,
But that is changing.
ma non è più così.
Now instead of thinking, he's texting,
Invece di pensare, manda messaggini.
reacting to 5, 6, 7 texts
Risponde a 5, 6, 7 messaggini che riceve,
without the private time for contemplation about his authentic self.
senza avere tempo per contemplare il suo sé autentico.
Winnicott, back to the text, thank you. Winnicott insisted that our technique must accommodate the patient who is communicating to us that he is not communicating. Being alone, yet in the presence of the analyst, may fulfill an important developmental need that the analyst should not violate by bombarding the patient with interpretations. Erik Erikson, the American analyst, also noted the need for the adolescent or young adult to have a time out from the hectic and confusing environmental messages he or she receives, a place of stillness to come to terms with one's emerging identity. Now, one of the great ironies of our era in 2012 is that the command, "be authentic," is the advice of the day provided by social networking coaches who are helping their clients succeed online. Yet there is no time set aside to look inward to find the true self of Winnicott or Erickson's integrated self that emerges from time out. Hence, the contemporary young adult must decide which version of the self should be represented on social media like Facebook, so they have the greatest chance of appearing authentic to others. But appearing authentic and being authentic are not the same thing. This solitude needed for self-reflection is hard to find today. Perhaps in an airplane at 35,000 feet, we are still liberated from cell phones and emails, but even this sanctuary is being invaded by Wi-Fi. The typical college student is bombarded by electronic messages to the point where there is little sense of agency. One reacts to a barrage of information. One does not initiate autonomous action from somewhere deep within. Turkle also stresses that in online existence, young adults and adolescents can summon anyone they need in an instant, a narcissistic form of object relatedness that thrives on instant gratification without having to struggle with delay, unmet desire, and the realistic expectation that we cannot always have what we want when we want it. Indeed, since 2000, Americans are scoring higher and higher on tests designed to measure narcissism. And divorce lawyers report that more and more divorces are linked to the time spent on Facebook and the competition of those relationships with the marital bond. I'm going to depart from the text. One of the things we see in the United States is that marriages break up.
Quello che vediamo negli Stati Uniti è che i matrimoni si sfasciano
Because of an internet affair, in quotation marks,
perché c'è una storia, tra virgolette, su internet, una relazione,
but the two people in the affair have never met.
ma le due persone che hanno questa relazione non si sono mai viste di persona,
They have never had sexual relations,
non hanno mai avuto rapporti sessuali,
but they spent hours and hours and hours in internet communication,
ma spendono ore e ore a comunicare attraverso la rete.
so that one of the great fascinating phenomena that happens with the internet
E quindi uno dei grandi fenomeni affascinanti che avviene con la presenza di internet
is that the person who lives in your house with you is someone you cannot talk to.
è che la persona che vive con te nella tua stessa casa è una persona a cui non riesci a parlare,
But the person who is on your computer screen, you can pour out your heart to.
mentre invece riesci a dire tutte le tue cose più segrete alla persona che sta davanti a te sullo schermo.
So there's a huge problem in terms of the impact on intimacy.
E quindi il vero problema si pone in termini dell'impatto di internet sull'intimità.
The long-standing wisdom of psychoanalysis has been that the frustration of our needs and desires builds ego strength over time. We learn to reflect on the nature of our desires and their origins when they cannot be gratified. Now we turn to another aspect of the self that I call the indelible self, the permanent self. One of the most disconcerting recent trends is that in the midst of trying on different selves, we are discovering that there is a permanent, unerasable self recorded in our texts, emails, tweets, and blogs. We are witnessing a major transformation of the cyber self. One used to be able to shift from one identity to another with ease on the internet. Now we are becoming painfully aware that what we email, text, and tweet leaves a permanent record that is difficult to erase. Facebook photos of medical students, psychiatric residents, smoking marijuana, partying in sexually provocative clothing, or drinking heavily have resulted in professionalism problems that have kept them from being accepted into training programs. Let me depart from the text for a moment. We now think that the professional role of a psychologist or a psychiatrist is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Oggi siamo arrivati al punto che il ruolo professionale dello psicologo e dello psichiatra dura 24 ore al giorno e 7 giorni alla settimana.
If you are at a party on a Saturday night and photographs are taken,
Andate a una festa sabato sera e c'è qualcuno che fa le foto,
these photographs may become public record on Facebook,
e questo qualcuno le posta su Facebook, quindi sono a disposizione di tutti,
and they may jeopardize your chances of getting a fellowship or a job.
e questo può mettere in pericolo la vostra possibilità di ottenere per esempio una borsa di studio o magari anche un lavoro.
Now, recently, the New York Times reported a case of a 66-year-old psychotherapist from Canada who was denied permission to cross the border into the United States because at the border they did a web search and they found that he had written an article in a philosophy journal describing his experiments with LSD 30 years ago. So they said, you cannot cross the border.
Gli hanno impedito di entrare per quello che aveva fatto 30 anni prima.
And he said, are you kidding? That was 30 years ago.
E lui ha detto, ma mi state prendendo in giro? 30 anni fa ho scritto quell'articolo.
And at the border they said, we don't care, you used LSD and that's against the law.
Non ce ne frega niente, lei ha fatto uso di LSD e questo contro la legge.
So while it was once said that the internet offered the opportunity at reinventing ourselves, it now seems apparent that the internet is shackling us to everything we ever said or did. Unfortunately, we are also finding it increasingly difficult to remove erroneous or false information about ourselves. In a very clever op-ed piece in the New York Times, Zick Rubin, an American sociologist, wrote about how he recently Googled himself and he discovered the following Wikipedia entry. Zick Rubin, 1944 to 1997, was an American social psychologist. He contacted one of the co-founders of Wikipedia and said, I am not dead, I am still alive. The editor insisted that an authoritative source had informed her that the Wikipedia entry was, in fact, correct. Now, Rubin, with considerable wit, said that he began to question his own existence. And he recognized that perhaps he was too close to the situation to be objective. He noted, now that I had been made aware of my death 14 years ago, I began to feel some twinges starting in my right elbow and my fingers. With persistence, however, he was finally able to convince the powers that be at Wikipedia that he was still breathing. So they ultimately resurrected him on the pages of Wikipedia, making him the Lazarus of cyberspace. Now, one is also subject to pranksters who enjoy entering false information on Wikipedia and seeing how long it takes before the prank is detected. I had a start when I read my own Wikipedia entry not long ago, and after accurately recounting my publications and my career, the entry ended with, Dr. Gabbard is currently an awesome ranger at the Cub Scout camp in Port Huron, New York. In fact, I had never set foot in Port Huron, New York. I did not know what an awesome ranger was, and I had not been in Cub Scouts since I was 10 years old. So I was able to eliminate this sentence from my entry, but it is disconcerting that one's identity may be shaped by false information. Now we go to privacy and analytic anonymity. While privacy and analytic anonymity have long been cornerstones of the analyst's life, privacy has been radically redefined by the expansion of cyberspace. Facebook began as a network for college students, but it has since grown into an international social network site of over 800 million members. On Facebook, members routinely bare their souls about the most gut-wrenching emotional phenomena and the most quotidian daily trivia that reflect the fabric of their lives. Users routinely announce where they are going to lunch as they leave their computers so friends can join them. Sexual proclivities, intimate details of sexual encounters, and the wildest of fantasies are all routinely shared on Facebook and greeted with a yawn by the millions of readers. Facebook attempts to teach members how to use their privacy settings to manage their network so they can speak discreetly and exclusively to close friends. But only 20% of members actually take advantage of their privacy settings. As one journalist noted, dwindling secrets and prying eyes are at the heart of the Facebook conundrum. While offering an efficient and far-reaching way for people to bond, the site has also eroded natural barriers. Now I will tell you how I recently received an email from someone I do not know with a concern about talking to her analyst. And I'll read you her email to me. This is in quotation marks. After 18 months of analysis, I'm still terrified to talk to him, but I am desperate to see him in between appointments. I'm technologically savvy, and I told him that I was able to gain entrance to the members-only section of the American Psychological Association website. I also told him I had seen his family photos on Facebook. He has teenage boys, and I'm very attracted to one of them in a strange way. His wife seems sweet and beautiful. I'm not jealous of her in terms of wanting her relationship with my therapist, but she's also a psychologist, and she's successful, has a great family, and a good life. I'm 35, twice divorced, still working on my dissertation, and I have nothing to show for myself. I've had the photos for a few months, and he knows at least that I saw them, but tonight I sent him an email with the ones I have and a brief summary of what I think about them. Now I think he will hate me, try to push me away to protect his family from me. Okay, now to depart from the... See, I don't know who this was, and I chose not to respond.
Non so chi sia questa persona, per cui ho deciso di non rispondere.
Because if I respond, she may think that she has established a consultant relationship with me.
E ho deciso di non risponderle perché se rispondo lei può pensare che ha creato un rapporto di consulenza con me.
But I don't wish to have any responsibility for someone I have never met, and my advice could be quoted by her.
Ma non voglio assumersi la responsabilità di parlare con una persona che non conosco, non ho mai visto, perché se le rispondo qualcosa lei può citarmi esplicitamente.
Back to the text. This vignette is not rare. Privacy is disappearing. In an in-depth profile of Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, in Time magazine, he questioned why people needed to conceal things about themselves and even said that having different identities is lacking in integrity. The Google CEO, Eric Schmidt, also questions the furor over the erosion of privacy, and in an interview he said, "If you have something you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place." To be sure, analytic anonymity had already been in free fall prior to the expansion of Facebook, Google, and other intrusions into our private lives. The rise of self-disclosure as an accepted therapeutic intervention and the influence of constructivism and relational theory heralded a shift from a one-person to a two-person psychology, initiated the demise of the blank screen analyst and analytic anonymity along with it. Yes.
Io ho scritto schermo vuoto, scusate, ho scritto schermo vuoto, in realtà è schermo opaco, è la traduzione formale di blank screen.
The capacity to Google your analyst has thoroughly eroded analytic anonymity. Patients can now find out where you are going, which meeting you are attending. They can read online all about your children, your spouse or partner, and your parents. A colleague of mine is married to a minister, and she was shocked when one of her male patients Googled her and found photos of her husband and children at their church. He commented on her family members in some detail, and he thought he might attend her husband's church also. She was deeply shaken and felt violated by this intrusion into her private life. Everything about a clinician is fair game on search engines like Google. It is now commonplace for a patient to Google me before coming to see me for the first time. Recently, a new patient came to my office, and the first thing she said to me was, "I don't understand why you became a psychoanalyst." I asked her what she meant by the question, and she said, "Because you have a background in drama." Then I realized she had researched me on the web, and she learned that my university degree was in drama. We then spent some time discussing her thoughts about my educational background. Fortunately, she was forthright in bringing up her concerns. Other potential patients may decide against coming to the first session. Those who arrive in the office will very likely have specific transference predispositions that need to be explored. Patients can even read what disgruntled patients may think of you on websites devoted to patients who wish to complain about their therapists. As a result, a great deal of information can appear. A patient who feels his analyst is not sufficiently empathic about his concerns may angrily denounce his analyst on the websites devoted to rate your doctors and make false claims about him. I'm going to depart.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have websites in Italy that rate your doctor?
Ce l'abbiamo noi dei siti su cui c'è scritto date un voto ai vostri dottori?
Yes, they're coming. Yeah. One of the things that happened to a colleague of mine
A un mio collega è successa questa cosa.
was she's a very good psychiatrist, and a drug-seeking patient came to her office. Drug-seeking patient.
È una psichiatra, questa collega, una donna, una psichiatra molto brava, è arrivato al suo studio un paziente che voleva delle droghe. Medicine, sì.
And he asked for 8 milligrams of alprazolam or Xanax.
Voleva 8 mg di Xanax, come si chiama in italiano?
Xanax.
Okay. No, il nome tecnico.
And she said, "No, I think you have an addiction to the Xanax, so I will not prescribe it."
E la dottoressa ha detto no, perché penso che lei sia dipendente dallo Xanax e quindi non glielo prescrivo.
So the patient became furious.
Il paziente si è infuriato,
He walked out and slammed the door of her office.
è uscito sbattendo la porta,
Then he went on to the website, Rate Your Doctor.
è andato sul sito su cui si dà appunto il voto ai dottori.
He said this doctor is callous, unempathic, rude,
Ha scritto che questa dottoressa non è per niente empatica, è molto maleducata. Callous non so dire esattamente cosa vuol dire, quindi
and he
lo lascio a chi
said,
lo sa.
he said, "I would not send my dog to this doctor."
E ha scritto non manderei nemmeno il mio cane da questa dottoressa.
So, and this was actually a very competent psychiatrist doing a good job with the patient.
In realtà la dottoressa è una persona molto competente, stava facendo bene il suo lavoro col paziente.
And the problem was because of confidentiality, she could not respond on the website.
Ma il problema è che per motivi di riservatezza non poteva rispondere sul sito.
She could not reveal that she treated this.
Non può dire che è lei che ha in cura questo paziente.
So this is a huge problem in the United States.
Questo è un problema molto serio negli Stati Uniti.
Now, another problem is that many people have the same name, and a Google search may turn up arrests or criminal activity that are the responsibility of someone with the same name as the clinician. Patients also can find out exactly where you live, and if they wish, they can look up what you paid for your house and the size of your mortgage. A significant portion of our privacy is gone, and we are all likely to feel violated in the years to come. We don't have much choice. We can feel violated, but our privacy has been redefined. Anything that can be Googled is now public. If an analyst brings up the patient intrusiveness for analytic exploration or attempts to set limits on it, the patient may well respond, "This is public information available to anyone. I'm not invading your privacy." This retort may rattle the analyst and lead to a variation of a therapeutic impasse in the treatment. Now I'm telling you a vignette. Not long ago, Dr. Smith, an analytic candidate who was in supervision with me, reported a jarring event involving a breach of his privacy. Dr. Smith shared an office suite with a woman named Dr. Jones. Although they are not married, they have lived together in romantic bliss for many years. They share the same waiting room, and their names are on their respective offices in full view of anyone in the waiting room. However, there is no indication whatsoever that the two live together, and they didn't have wedding rings on, so one would not know that. So Dr. Smith was analyzing Ms. Wilson, a married woman in her 30s, who had an intense erotic transference to him. She longed for greater contact with Dr. Smith, and she felt frustrated with the distance inherent in the analytic relationship. Out of curiosity, Ms. Wilson decided to find out where her analyst lived. She put Dr. Smith's name into the website for county property tax and found out that he lived with Dr. Jones at the same address. She was enraged. She decided she would not go to analysis that day. Instead, at the moment when her session should have started, she sent the following email to Dr. Smith, who read it in his office. And now I'm going to read you the email. Dr. Smith, I checked online this morning to see where I could go to vote for the current election, and I used a web address that is based on where I live. Then I put in your name for fun. I was horrified to learn that you reside on 3rd Street with Dr. Jones. Do you have any idea how much this peeves and embarrasses me? I thought I had privacy coming to see you for a session. I see now that I was wrong. Shall I pass inspection with your wife first before I'm allowed to sit in your waiting room? Are you really married? If so, why don't you wear a wedding ring? What kind of office are you running there? An orgy office? As so-called professionals? Doesn't anyone recall why it's important not to mix family with business? You might as well hold sessions in your house. What difference does it make? Your house, my house, his house, the dog's house, the White House. You fail all your patients when you set it up that way. Emphasis is on set up. It is only about doing is it only about doing business your way, whatever is most convenient for the prima donna's practice? Forget how it screws the client mentally. Slap some kind of diagnosis on the client and call it a day. Psychoanalysis in this town is a mental orgy. I don't recall inviting, much less paying for Dr. Jones' presence in my analysis. She shows up for my work every day anyway. What do? Compare notes over martinis and a cigar at the end of the day? As far as I'm concerned, you can both go fuck yourselves. So she signed her name at the bottom of the email. Dr. Smith told me in supervision he read this and felt a mixture of horror, violation, guilt, and anger. Mrs. Wilson had seen Dr. Jones many times going in and out of the waiting room and her office, and had even speculated about whether Dr. Smith and Jones got along. The invasion of Dr. Smith's privacy was deeply disconcerting to him because he realized the patient's arrival at his office now had a symbolic meaning of walking into the primal scene. Her reference to the orgy clearly conveyed that she felt like she was interrupting an afternoon sexual encounter when she came to be treated. Of course, by communicating on email, Dr. Smith was unable to analyze her reaction with her. When the patient arrived at the next session the following day, she appeared to be aloof and commented on going over the county tax records and tracking the appraisals of their home and property. She commented to Dr. Smith, "Well, that house has increased in value very nicely since you first bought it." Dr. Smith attempted to get her to talk more directly about the experience of discovering Dr. Smith's private life online. While at first reluctant, Miss Wilson eventually was able to express how shattered and disillusioned she was. Discovering that Dr. Smith was in a long-term relationship with Dr. Jones dashed her hopes of ever having him for herself. Acting out her curiosity on the web led to the intrusion of a third into what she thought was a private dyad behind closed doors. As the analysis went on, Dr. Smith noted that the loss of his analytic anonymity had some positive repercussions for the treatment. As Tom Stoppard, the playwright, said in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, every exit is an entrance somewhere else. So Dr. Smith realized that Ms. Wilson's discovery of Dr. Jones heralded the beginning of a termination process. The patient could no longer hang on to infantile yearnings for an impossible and forbidden object. She had to begin a mourning process in which she recognized that she would have to relinquish what she could not have, and she would have to strengthen her relationship with her husband, which was reasonably good anyway, and focus herself on her children. It also led her to reignite a long dormant career. This is only one vignette among many that I have heard in recent years. We cannot prevent patients from knowing all kinds of things about us. We must practice now with a full awareness that what was formerly private is now public information. If we attempt to restrict access to that information, the patient will only be more curious about what we are trying to hide. Of course, the reverse situation is also becoming increasingly common. Therapists may Google their patients and learn information about them that the patient has concealed from the therapist. While this activity is not unethical, it could certainly be experienced by the patient as intrusive, and it has the potential to disrupt the therapeutic alliance. Now I move to the third category, the intrusion of electronic communication into the analyst-patient relationship. Analysts today are growing accustomed to receiving emails and texts from their patients. I'm going to ask a question. How many of you have received an email from your patient?
Quanti di voi hanno ricevuto una lettera di posta elettronica dei loro pazienti?
A lot, yeah. How many have received a text message?
I messaggini?
See, almost everybody.
Quasi tutti.
Yeah. Now, I think analysts are growing accustomed to receiving emails and texts from their patients. We live and work in a society where it is viewed as an unnecessary nuisance to use a telephone or an unnecessary delay to wait until the next session to discuss something with one's analyst. One single female patient who I treat sent me a text at 11 p.m. on Friday night asking me if I thought she should go to bed with the man she was dating. I chose not to reply because I wanted to avoid any implication that this was a reasonable issue to bring up as a text message to one's analyst. However, when she came back the next week, I attempted to analyze her texting at the session. Now, the expectation of texting and other forms of electronic communication are presenting us with formidable challenges. I want to give you a brief clinical vignette about Ms. B. She's a 28-year-old investment banker. She came to analysis because she was highly successful at work but was deeply troubled by her romantic relationships. She routinely texts me to let me know if she's running late or she will be on time for the session. In one particular session, I was sitting in my office and I look at my iPhone and she says, "Bad traffic, we'll be late, maybe 15 minutes. Then about 15 minutes later, I receive another text, "Parking now." Then about 3 minutes later, I receive a text saying, "I'm in the waiting room now." So I go and get her in the waiting room. And during the sessions with me, she reclines on the couch and she has 2 smartphones at her side. When she receives a text, she briefly checks it, sometimes apologizing for interrupting her associations, and then she returns to the analytic process. On her Wednesday session, an important report from the stock market is issued around 2 o'clock. So her phone vibrates. She says to me, "Just a minute," checks the phone, and then returns to our discussion. She also reads me text messages from her new boyfriend. For example, one morning she came into my office, she lay on the couch, and she said, "I'm really liking Brian. He's always sending me sweet little texts. I just got one, I'll read it to you." And so she holds the phone up here, I'm behind her. She goes, "Thinking about you last night and I can't concentrate at work." Then she says, "Isn't that lovely? He is thinking about me right now." She then raised the phone so I could see it. And she says, "Here's another one. Quick, which star would make you want to see a film? Brad Pitt or Ryan Gosling?" So the reading of the texts and the frequent interruptions in the sessions presented me with dilemmas that are not easily resolved. As I have always argued in my analytic writing, there is no correct way to do analysis. Each patient must do analysis the way that he or she must do it. Hence, an effort to set limits on the use of texting or access to the iPhone potentially may create problems for the analyst. The patient might well feel that he or she is doing analysis incorrectly and thus try to conform to the analyst's wishes or rebel against the analyst's wishes. Psychoanalysis is not coercive. We allow our patients to show us who they are without controlling what they say or do. On the other hand, an analyst cannot simply ignore the use of texting or the interruption of the session to check one's smartphone. One must attempt to analyze whatever is transpiring in the analytic discourse, just as I insisted that messages from my patient Rachel in the Cyber Passion paper had to become part of our analytic work. They cannot be allowed to exist in a split-off virtual world that is outside the scope of the analysis. So I made an observation to Ms. B. I said, sometimes I have the impression that it's difficult for you to be fully present here, as though you have one foot in my consulting room and one foot in the virtual world of cyber communication. She was puzzled by my comment. Her reply was, what do you mean? I pointed out that her full engagement in the analysis was perhaps compromised by her attention to the messages bombarding her through her iPhone. She laughed and said, oh no, these are no problem. I can both analyze and check my texts at the same time. It doesn't take me out of the room. Now I recognized that from my perspective, I was trying to call attention to something that was unusual in the context of psychoanalytic work. But from her perspective, she felt it was somewhat jarring for me to call attention to a routine part of her daily existence, typical of virtually everyone she knew in her age group. Her response was to attempt to help me understand that I was simply old-fashioned. She finally said to me, oh, come on, Dr. Gabbard, this is 2012. Everyone is texting these days. Phone calls are obsolete. Sometimes you sound like a dinosaur. In other words, what she was doing was utterly normal and required no analytic reflection. So as I drove home that evening, I was doing some self-analysis in my car, as I always do. Her designation of me as a dinosaur took me by surprise. I associated to Lowald's classic paper on the waning of the Oedipus complex. It is the natural order. We must not attempt to force our analysans to submit to our preferred ways of doing things. We must understand that change has been set in motion, and we cannot stop it. We must adjust as we take our ultimate place as ancestors to our analysans. Now, what are the implications for psychoanalysis? To be sure, we psychoanalysts are known to be rather resistant to change. Can we incorporate these forms of communication into our technique? Can we redefine the self of the analyst as an open book to our patient? Or should we forbid our patients to text us, email us, or Google us? Of course, we know that what is most forbidden is most enticing. I'm going to depart from the text. If you tell a 10-year-old boy, do not go into that door. Don't open that door and go into the room.
Se prendete un bambino di 10 anni e gli dite non entrare in quella porta, non entrare in quella stanza.
As soon as you turn your back, the boy will go into the room.
Appena vi girate, il ragazzino naturalmente entrerà in quella stanza.
Because what is most forbidden is most enticing.
Perché quello che è proibito è molto più attraente.
Now, can we allow our lifelong approach to analytic work to be transformed by the electronic transmission of information? While no answer to these questions is definitive, what we can do is to incorporate these new clinical challenges into our training of analysts, our analytic literature, and our clinical thinking. How do we define analytic boundaries in light of the decline of analytic anonymity? As soon as we begin to think about policies on appropriate use of email, texting, etc., we find there are exceptions to any principle we adopt. We are going to need to improvise for a while until we find a comfort level that suits each of us and our patients. We can rethink the notion of analytic anonymity. The classical notion of the analyst's privacy is now a thing of the past. But we can still harbor private thoughts and fantasies. No one can read our minds yet. Thomas Malone, the director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Center for Collective Intelligence, made an apposite observation. For most of human history, People have lived in small tribes where everything they did was known by everyone they know. In some sense, we've become a global village. Privacy may turn out to have become an anomaly. In closing, I would like to say that we cannot turn back time. We cannot rewind the videotape. Perhaps we can find creative ways of adapting to the brave new world we are encountering. As Dr. Smith learned, there may be benefits to the analytic process from the internet that we have yet to discover. There is no question that we are in the path of a juggernaut that will crush any opposition that arises. So we should probably go along for the ride and see where it leads us, rather than begin our journey with the dinosaurs towards extinction. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming out to be with us on a Saturday morning.
Grazie a tutti voi che siete venuti qui di sabato mattina.
Do we have enough chairs for our people in the back?
Spero che ci siano abbastanza sedie per tutti quanti.
I
Ci sono delle sedie qui davanti, eh?
we have some here, up here.
Prima fila.
I have been coming here now. I have been coming here now for maybe 6 years.
Sono forse 6 anni che vengo qui,
So I feel like I am part of the family here.
quindi
Very
mi sento
nice.
parte della famiglia.
It's nice to be with you again.
Mi fa piacere essere tornato.
And today we embark on a new frontier.
E quest'oggi ci partiamo per una nuova frontiera.
I will provide very few answers, but many questions.
Vi darò pochissime risposte, ma farò molte domande.
Now I begin reading.
We were
A questo
waiting
punto
for
leggiamo, quindi voi ci avete
answers to the questions.
sullo schermo la traduzione.
Said, if you listen first and write later, then whatever you write will have had time to filter through your brain, and you will be in what you say. This is what makes you exist. If you are only a reflector of information, are you really there? Surely any forces that are the antithesis of introspection and self-reflection will have far-reaching consequences for the practice of psychoanalysis. Those consequences are formidable to contemplate and impossible to foresee in toto. Hence, in this communication today, I will confine myself to only 3 of the areas affected by this brave new world of cyberspace. 1, the self. 2, the domain of privacy. And 3, the intrusion of electronic communication into the analyst-patient relationship. I will also comment on the generational shift that is embedded in this revolution. To keep my presentation reasonably brief, I will not address Skype or phone therapy in this communication. So now we start with the self. Life in cyberspace provides us with the opportunity to hide out from others and become someone other than who we are. An adolescent girl can pretend to be a boy. One can shape a Facebook image to appeal to others rather than present oneself as one actually is, complete with flaws and shortcomings. A disenchanted adult can create an avatar and live an alternative existence in Second Life to compensate for disappointments in one's first and only life. In my 2001 paper in the Psychoanalytic Quarterly, Cyber Passion, Erotic Transference on the Internet, I wrote of a patient who engaged in a parallel analysis through email at the same time she was seeing me 4 times a week in my office. Her erotic transference was communicated almost entirely through email, since she could not abide the thought of communicating verbally to me about her sexual feelings. In effect, I dealt with a form of splitting that had previously been outside my experience. A proper and inhibited patient reclined on the couch in my office, but a passionately sexual version of the patient existed only in the realm of the internet, sending me emails. The fluidity or multiplicity of Massachusetts Institute of Technology
Sherry Turkle è una delle principali esperti di internet e lavora all'MIT.
says you can have a sense of self without being oneself. Moreover, to an alarming extent, the assortment of electronic instruments that hold us hostage, Twitter, social networking, blogging, email, texting, etc., may conspire to turn us away from the internal realm and demand that we attend to the external signals that surround us and command our attention. As Bill Keller, writing about Twitter in the New York Times Magazine, recently noted, Twitter is the enemy of contemplation.
Ah, scusate, ho tradotto proprio il contrario. Twitter è il nemico della contemplazione. Proprio, scusate, ho proprio sbagliato.
Jaron Lanier is the author of a book, You Are Not a Gadget, and a leading critic of the social change brought about by technology. He addressed this problem boldly at the South by Southwest Interactive Conference in Austin, Texas, 2 years ago. Before he gave his talk, he asked everyone in the audience to turn off their handheld devices so they could not blog, text, or tweet while he was speaking. He later wrote about this radical maneuver, and he's over a decade ago, the playwright Sam Shepard made the following observation. The struggle with the land is finished. Now the frontier is the computer, so it has become an internal thing. Computers cause protracted dreaming about what might be, and the frontier everyone is seeking is now in the imagination. Today, a retrospective assessment of Shepard's comment was that it was prophetic. Perhaps it did not go far enough. The cyberspace is an internal thing is only partly true, but it also has a lot in common with transitional space in Winnicott's sense. In other words, it is not truly an internal realm, but it lies somewhere between external reality and our internal world. When we sit at the computer, we are both real and not real. There is a fundamental paradox in cyber communication. It presents a radical challenge to our traditional notions of privacy, but also offers us a place to hide. It allows for the possibility of a playful expansion of the self. The screen persona is both me and not me. As Sherry Turkle, a leading scholar of the internet at the